Welcome to the Tanya Acker Show. Beth Macy is the author of Dopesick, which explores the impact of the opioid epidemic on American communities. It also became a spectacular limited series on Hulu, streaming on Hulu. And her latest book is Paper Girl, which explores the impact of political polarization and misinformation in her own community, where she grew up. Beth is here with me now. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Here I am with Beth Macy. Beth Macy, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Tanya.
One of the things that really compels me about your work is how you've discussed the manner in which your upbringing has influenced it. You grew up in a small town. There are about 14,000 people. I read a quote from you where you said, being poor was one of the best things that happened to me. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to you to share stories that are influenced by the way you grew up and the folks with whom you grew up?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. That really gets to the heart of all the work I've ever done since I got out of college in 1986. I have always written about outsiders and underdogs. Even when I was a newspaper reporter, if I was tasked with writing about a topic, I would not go to the CEO. I would go to the dislocated worker and I would work my journalism up. And I've always done that. Like when I wrote Factory Man, which is about the aftermath of globalization, I started with the people that lost their jobs and the people who babysit for the families that ran the town and, just kind of unlikely people who know the nitty gritty of what's going on. And because I grew up as an underdog myself, my mom was a dislocated worker. I remember when somebody gave me her phone number and then said, well, you better take my mom's too, because my cell phone's about to be disconnected. And we don't tell those stories as journalists enough. When the recession was happening, only 2% of all stories, Pew Center did a research, involved people who were hurt by the recession. It was mostly told from the point of view of businesses and CEOs. 2%? I mean, come on, we got to get out of our silos with that.
You've talked also about this community of people, folks with whom you grew up and the folks about whom you write as being forgotten. And that term is thrown about regularly, I think, in the culture, in the media. Who are they? Like in my head, I have a sense of who they are, but I'd rather hear it from you. Who are the people who you think the media and the culture and the country forgot?
Well, I think people in small towns today have almost no local news. I mean, I was shocked to see that a paper I once delivered and later reported for as a college intern now only has basically 1.5 writers on staff. It's a sports reporter and the editor, and they don't even cover city council very much anymore. And so it's all like press releases. And so there's somebody near the end of my book that says Urbana is just a country club set in the ghetto, and no one knows what the other is up to. And I think that's how part of what's been driving this partisan divide. Most of the national news is manufactured in cities like where you live, like LA and New York and Chicago and DC. And, even my paper in Roanoke has gone from having 60 some reporters to just, I think, 5 now. So we don't even, in the areas that are what we now call news deserts, we don't even know what we don't know. You can find all kinds of things online to buttress what you think you already know, right? So that's where I think it gets dangerous.
That's what the algorithm does, my friend. That's what the algorithm does. Before we talk about your new book, Paper Girl, which is fascinating, like the whole story behind why you wanted to write that book is fascinating, and we'll get there. But I can't not, forgive the double negative, I know you're a writer, talk about Dopesick, which became a limited series, spectacularly done. Michael Keaton and others were just brilliant, I think, in bringing these stories to life. But it was so interesting because I think watching that, there was a clear perspective, which is certainly drawn from the perspective of your writing, which is we are not going to tell the story from the perspective of here are people who just decided to be addicted and they made bad choices, right? Like there is the what people did in response to their addiction. You don't flinch away from that. But the movie and the book, because I read about how you seem to have been kind of involved in the crafting of the television story, really focuses on how they came to be presented with the choices that they were, how they ended up there, how they ended up, going from I hurt my back and I'm a displaced worker to now I need more and more oxy. I don't want to ask you how deliberate that choice was because it was clearly very deliberate. But why do you think it's important to approach that particular crisis from the perspective that you did?
Because we've spent so many decades, I mean, since the war on drugs, just demonizing drug users and just painting them as criminals and moral failures. And the story of the opioid crisis, especially when you go back to the origins of Oxycontin in 1996, and when you delve in, you see how these rapacious pill peddlers, a family of millionaires that wants to be billionaires, really are the font of this. And then you see how it switches to heroin and now fentanyl and methamphetamine. I didn't want to write a third book about the opioid crisis, but lo and behold, in my hometown, so much of what you see with rising foster care, um, people not sending their kids to school, and then pulling them out and lying that they're homeschooling. This is a direct result of drug addiction.
What you do so well is to explain how the addict becomes the addict because it was really powerful. You liked the telling. I mean, sometimes writers don't love the way their books
I
or their
Yes,
work, but you liked this, didn't you? You
I
liked
loved it, and I was very involved in the fact that if people see an A-list actor who's a doctor like Michael Keaton having, even a doctor having a tough time getting on methadone and becoming a doctor again, getting on Suboxone, which is, both of those drugs are evidence-based treatments because addiction is a chronic relapsing disease and people can get better if we make these medicines available to them, but there's so much stigma about them. That was probably my biggest contribution to the show, was convincing the showrunner, Danny Strong, who is wonderful, and the rest of the writers that we can really change the narrative about how this should be handled. And as an example, right after the show came out, one of the writers in our room lives in New York City and was standing in line at a CVS, and he had a Hulu mask on. It was still COVID. And this woman standing behind him said, "Have you seen that new show, Dopesick?" And he's like, "Yeah, I kind of worked on it, blah, blah, blah." And she goes, "I watched that show, and for the first time in 3 years, I called my addicted son."
Mm.
And so, like, I get goosebumps just retelling that story, that it changed families, the way people talk about it in families. I mean, I've had anecdotally a lot of people tell me that, but that's just huge. And, Danny was all up for that storyline. He wanted to make sure we knew who the real perpetrators were, but also how to help people get out of it.
What do you think of the ultimate Sackler settlement? $7.4 billion, no immunity from lawsuits by those who were harmed by the marketing efforts. And by the way, folks, if you haven't read Dopesick, if you haven't seen it, watch it because it really does, I think, communicate how, at least at a minimum, it communicates a big part of how this crisis became what it was. There was very aggressive marketing by Purdue Pharma to make sure these drugs were available to people. One thing led to the next. What do you think about the settlement as it now stands?
I know a lot of the parents and the activists who think it's not enough, and it isn't. It's not going to bring their children back, but it's more than they had the last time there was a settlement. But I keep coming back to this quote that a prosecutor gave me while I was working on Dopesick, way before all this, went to the Supreme Court and all that. And he said, unless white collar criminals go to jail, the behavior continues. Nobody has gone to jail for this. 0 people have gone to jail for this. We know they made, 13 billion off OxyContin alone. What's 7.4? Not quite half. If people still have their wealth, then that equals power in this country.
But their names were stripped from the Met Gallery. Isn't that crime? Isn't that punishment enough? What do you want from people?
They're still on the Smithsonian. They're still up at Harvard.
It's
maybe this is too vindictive, but I've just seen so many mothers suffer. So many mothers not be able to get over this. There's one mother, she's basically lost her life. She's just such in a mental health hole of darkness. And, the people leading the charge against all these lawsuits and whatnot, trying to make sure the victims got compensated, they're really worn out, but they're still in it to win it. And it's never going to be enough. But we need to make treatment as easy to get as the dope is to get.
So when I think about some of the reasons why these particular communities were so vulnerable to the marketing, the jobs have left, the jobs on which they were injured have left. They are, stuck with their pain and no work. And then somebody who's like, oh, here's a lollipop, or I'll up your dose so you're not in so much pain. When you watch how this dosing happened in Dopesick and how that was sort of the medication of choice for these people who were in pain, it's almost a little bit surprising, because surprising and not surprising, but in the normal course, you have to often jump through hoops to get treatments or therapies that people need. It seems like it's easier to get Oxy, than it is to get prenatal care, frankly.
Right. Especially back then. And one of the things they did is they targeted areas with high percentages of Medicaid population and dislocated workers, because they knew that those people, a lot of people initially were prescribed by their doctors, maybe had a little pain, but they realized quickly that they could get a prescription, take half, sell the other half, and make $1 a milligram on the black market. So it became a side hustle, a way to pay their other bills that they couldn't pay anymore.
That dislocation and the economic uncertainty is a good segue to your new book, Paper Girl. I haven't read it yet, but I am. Seems to be an exploration of how this community is faring now and kind of its political aspirations. Why don't I let you talk about that book and why you wrote it?
Sure. In 2020, it was actually the week of the election, and I was sitting, my mom was dying. She was in hospice at a memory care facility, and I was sitting with my evangelical sister in Ohio. It was the Saturday they were recounting the votes in Georgia, and the hospice nurse's phone blings, and she goes, they're calling it for Biden. And I was just kind of sitting there. Mom was literally about to breathe her last breath. She was like, and my sister, who had never really talked about politics before, just goes off and says, it's fraudulent. You wait. He won't win. And I was just like, when Mom dies, what's left to bring us together. My brother-in-law had already started answering the simple question, "How you doing, John?" with deplorable, trying to goad me into a debate. My brother, around Trump's first election, unfriended me on Facebook because of, quote, all the liberal crap I post, which were fact-checked articles, some of which I had written myself. And some of my oldest, bestest friends in Urbana hate the media, even though I would point out, I'm the media too. You still love me, right? And I would tell them about, like, when you write a piece for the Times, the fact checkers, they'll put a fact checker on it for days sometimes if it's a complicated piece. They'll track down homeless people who are addicted that don't have the same phone number that you gave them. And they'll interview them to make sure you got it right. And my friend snapped back at me, "Who fact checks the fact checkers?" And I just thought, how do we get to a place where 20% of Americans can't talk to their families anymore because of politics? And so I wanted to answer that question, and also figure out how much harder it had gotten for a poor but promising kid as I was to make it into the middle class. So I followed the travails of this young kid, Silas, who was also the leader of the same band I was the leader of, although now it's like shrunken into like a fifth of the size it was because the community's so much poorer. And if you're in the band, you have to buy an instrument and have to get a ride home from practice and all that. And so it was a very eye-opening window.
So what did you find out? What's the have those perspectives hardened? I mean, one of the things that I was always and remain interested in is the fact that if you look at a lot of those voters, they voted for Obama and then Trump flipped them. So it's not as if, there are white folks in the middle of America who are afraid of leadership that doesn't look like them. Again, Barack Obama carried a lot of those voters. And then the Democratic Party subsequently lost them. I don't, necessarily, you don't need to go super political. I'm just wondering what, in the course of writing this book and living this experience, has it hardened? Where are folks now? And where does the immediate future lay for them?
It is definitely hardened. I mean, conspiracy theories are through the roof in Urbana. Our class reunion organizer is fully into QAnon. There was a hubbub, a battle over our last reunion that almost made it get canceled. One person got death threats, and that all started with somebody calling somebody else a white supremacist. And 3 out of 4 people in Urbana voted for Trump this time, which was a little higher than the time before. It's always been pretty conservative, but this, as the fact-based local news basically has gone away, people are finding community online, and the algorithms, as you said before. And so one of the people I interviewed that most helped me understand it was my ex-boyfriend. I hadn't seen him in 38 years. And it was kind of a reporting stunt. I'm like, who interviews their ex-boyfriend? I'm going to see what he's up to. Because I had heard he had gone from Bernie to Jill Stein and then to Trump and to QAnon and even further right than that. Like, I had heard that. So I interviewed him for many hours over the course of several months. And the first thing I learned was, like, my brother-in-law hates Hillary, had all these things to say about Hillary. I think when you say Obama to then Trump, I think the Clinton brand was just toxic by that point. He kept bringing up in this dinner at this nice restaurant that we would be talking about our gardens and our kids, because I was trying to kind of, keep it light to start with. And then he would say, but Hillary ordered Muammar Gaddafi anal raped. And I was like, where do you get this news from?
I'm sorry, I hadn't heard.
I
hadn't heard about that.
It came over and over. And during the course of my following him, he eventually got threatening to me. So I broke off all contact. And then do you remember the story of the Haitians in Springfield who were eating the
Yes,
pets and the
very,
cats?
very, very well.
He lives in Springfield. He becomes the leader of the anti-Haitian contingent right before my eyes. And so there's a picture of him near the end of the book at a Ramaswamy, however you say that name, rally, wearing his MAGA wear. At this point, he's posting on Twitter about the great replacement theory. This is one of the smartest people I knew, one of the most liberal people I knew. And when you go back to what made him radicalized, he was going to vote. I said he had voted for Bernie, and then he was going to vote for Jill Stein. And his friends kind of got around him, including his Catholic church deacon, said, "Hey, Bill, you want to go out for beer?" And a bunch of them, like, kind of, I don't know, ganged up is probably too strong, but said, this is basically a vote for Trump. And at that time, he didn't like Trump. He said, I was an NPR tote bag carrying member of the liberal side. And he said it just felt like they had a meeting, an influencers meeting, and they decided, we don't hold my latte. We don't like Bill's beliefs anymore. And so he basically lost his friend circle and his faith circle at the same time. And where does he find community? He finds it online. And by the time I meet up with him again, he is literally reading Russian propaganda for 4 to 7 hours a day, he told me. And he's so angry.
We'll put aside the question of the advisability of engaging with ex-boyfriends
Right.
with axes to grind, but
hey, he broke up with me. I had no ex to grind.
Yeah, you should be glad, girl. You dodged a bullet.
Girl, I'm so glad.
You dodged a bullet. But on a more serious note, so did you find anything hopeful? Because everything you just said actually is frightening and suggests that we are much further away than reasonable minds would hope to kind of finding some palatable and reasonable solutions to things. The government is shut down, and a lot of people think that it's shut down because, as it's said by one party, the Democrats want to provide health care to undocumented people. The federal programs at issue do not allow for that. It's not true, but a lot of people believe it because, as you just pointed out in your experience, people are very susceptible to believing things irrespective of whether or not they have a basis in fact. So did you discover anything hopeful? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I went in thinking that my family was whack. And then as I got to know other people, I saw that my family was like normal in comparison. I had a few wins. I did a lot of research on how to talk and communicate across the divide. And I tried to employ those techniques in interviews. Sometimes it went well. Other times it was a disaster. Like when I'm telling my evangelical sister, like I'm saying, my son Max thinks you don't like him because he's gay. And she says, well, I love him, but I don't like him. And, basically she starts quoting from Leviticus, man shall not lie with man. It is an abomination. And I just get really pissed off. And I'm like, if we're going to have a relationship, we can't talk about this anymore. And we ended that interview with, well, I guess I won't invite you to the wedding. And she goes, yeah, I guess I won't come. But, with my brother, I was able to sort of rebuild a siblinghood. Just one moment at a time, meeting each other as people. We went fishing, something we hadn't done since we were kids. We bought this little cabin on the creek up in the mountains, and he loves fishing. So he came up and he taught me how to fish again. I hadn't fished since I was a little girl. And we had these really tender conversations. I have another child who's non-binary. And he said, with love and curiosity in his voice, well, does he still date girls? And I said, yes, they're dating a young woman now. And I still mess up the pronouns too. So it's trying to employ the techniques I was learning about extending grace, because he never knew another person that was non-binary and he hadn't seen him in years. And now he's like, Sasha, that child that I'm talking about is a musician and travels all over with his band Palmyra performing. And now Tim will drive 8 hours to see a Palmyra show, and he's one of their super fans on Facebook. It's like he saw this different thing that kind of scared him at the beginning. And then you realize this is still the same nephew, what the non-binary word is for that, I'm not even sure. And there's still this child that I love. And furthermore, I love their music. Not long ago, he was at his campsite in rural Ohio, and he texted me. He's like, "I'm a little buzzed. I've had a few beers, but it's okay. I'm jamming to Restless," which is the name of their latest album. And love you, sister. And it's like just spending time with people and extending grace. I interviewed this Grammy award-winning rapper named Rhymefest, Shay Smith, who's now an activist, and he got elected school board in Chicago about this because he has this group of white friends in Wyoming that he spends a lot of time with. And he was like, don't take everything so personally. There are so many times when I'm with them that I have to extend grace. But in the long run, we have learned ways to communicate with each other. I just think like we all need a little therapy and coaching, I'm sorry, that's not the hopefulest tie it up in a bow answer, but
it's what you got. And it's very good because it reminds all of us to extend grace, which is particularly hard in the sort of fractured environment that we're now in. I mean, these are connections that you have with folks who think and view the world very differently, but it's your family. Like at some point, you're going to see your family. The ex-boyfriend who's now QAnon plus, you have a history with him. You have background with him. There's still, for so many people and for much of the country, there is no history or background. If you're growing up in small town in the Midwest, you look at Chicago or LA, cities that don't necessarily have more crime than some small towns, by the way, but you look at it as like, oh, it's this wild, crazy melee of crime.
Like
if you're
saying Portland is full of fires. I mean, what a lot of crap.
I know. They burn the almond milk for the lattes. They're going crazy in Portland. Not enough oatmeal. I mean, yeah, it's really, so they are thinking these things about people, on the coasts. And I don't even like that term, coastal elite, because it assumes too much. And similarly, I think that other folks are looking at some of these communities as if, they're not seeing the world outside of themselves. And there's not necessarily any overlap. Like, it's not like people always have friends or relatives with whom they can try to bridge the gap. So this is a tall question. I don't know if you have an answer. I'm just throwing it out. Like, do you see a way where it's possible for us to learn how to extend grace to those outside of our circles?
It is the question. I'm interviewing my first friend. I've known her since kindergarten. And she's the one who thinks kids identify as cats and take litter boxes to school. She also thinks George Floyd wasn't murdered by a cop, and she's African American. And when she said the thing about George Floyd, I was like, Joy, that's not true. She goes, I'll send you a link. And then she said the thing about the cats, and I rolled my eyes, which is.
I haven't heard the cat thing. Wait, what is the cat thing?
The cat thing is something the religious right uses as an example of how the left is so woke that they let their kids identify as cats and bring litter boxes to school.
That's it. That's like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode. Like, no, seriously. Like, I didn't know that was actually a thing in the world.
Yeah, I didn't either. I had heard it once before, but then to hear it from the mouth of this woman is such a good friend that she did my mom's funeral. I mean, she's like part of our family. And so I rolled my eyes and she goes, I know you disagree. The question is, how do we love beyond what we can't agree with or understand? And I mean, that is the takeaway question of this book. And I don't know exactly how we do it, but I know I saw Joy and a whole bunch of my friends from across this political spectrum this weekend in Urbana, Ohio. We met for a meal and we had a great time. Now, we didn't talk about anything political because we love each other and respect each other, but it was something.
I don't know how we get past all of this stuff. I am thrilled that voices like yours are at least attempting to model the fact that the only way you can start to get through it is to engage. The engagement is key, but
It's all we can
it's
do,
hard.
right?
It's all we can do right now.
It's so
It's all
hard.
we can
After
do
the
right
election,
now.
a friend of mine in Roanoke, which is a blue dot in a red region of Southwest Virginia, started this project called Do Good Virginia. She started bringing people together to talk about how we're going to move forward under the second Trump administration. And the very first meeting, we brought a speaker down from DC who was an expert on authoritarianism. And we also called in our state delegate, who's the only Muslim delegate in the Virginia House of Legislature, and a really cool guy. And, one of the things Sam, the delegate, said was that, well, let me talk about Andrea first. One of the things the authoritarian expert, Andrea Pitzer, who's an author, said was you need to connect the different parts in your life to each other. So Do Good started holding these rallies outside of our no-show congressman's office, who hasn't had a town hall in years, and it's just basically an empty suit, rubber stamp for Trump. And so we meet every Monday outside of this congressman's office at noon, and everybody has signs, and sometimes there's 350 people, but it's every Monday. And then afterwards, we have what I call a teach-in, wherein someone comes in from the community, maybe it's the literacy volunteers, and they talk about how their students, who are largely immigrants, are being impacted by the Trump policies and what you can do to help. And I've started writing a Substack about how the federal cuts and the changes are impacting my local community, because we have such less local press than we used to have. We all need to be telling these stories, but it's so great to begin to connect. People feel like they have something they can do. And as the delegate advised us, he said, figure out ways that you can work into your weekly routine, ways to give back to the people that are hurting the most. And that just that was like a meeting on November 20th. And I have kept that in my heart. And I've been doing it almost every week since. I've missed a couple of the rallies, but people are starting to feel like they're coming together. And there was a guy in a big pickup truck that drove by us a couple weeks ago. And he was kind of what you would expect. And he shouts out, I have never seen such a biggest group of dumbasses in my life. And I started smoke going out of my ears. And my friend Jean, who's a retired special ed teacher, she goes, I love America. And that was the perfect answer, right? Another time I was going back to my car carrying my No King sign, and somebody tried to run me over. I mean, shit, it's crazy out here, Tanya.
It's crazy to a level that I can't say I quite foresaw this. I knew we were divided. I didn't know that people would be trying to run down one of the nation's foremost journalists because they didn't like her sign. They didn't like the sign that she was carrying. Are you worried? Well, I'm going to ask a different question. I can't imagine you're not worried about the state of our of a free press.
I'm very worried about it.
Of course.
I think the Jimmy Kimmel story is just a tiny piece of it. I've got my jean jacket on that has the free press button on it. I'm very worried about that, but I'm also very worried just about the diminishment of local news, which has led us to where we are. And how are we going to get that back?
What's the path forward? On the one hand, I think a really facile answer would be, well, everybody can, anybody can get a Substack, or you can have these digital resources. We forget that digital world is not equally available to folks who don't have all of the info and devices and or the equipment
Fox
and devices.
News and Newsmax is, right?
Right.
Where
you can turn on the TV. You may not be able to, listen to or watch your Substack. So is there a path, or how do you see the path forward for these, smaller communities that, as you describe it, have been forgotten.
And like the Roanoke Times, where I worked for 25 years, again, a blue dot, a medium-sized city, and a really great newspaper, Pulitzer finalist 3 years in a row, but down to 6 reporters from more than 60 when I first arrived many years ago. And just to see it shrink, it's almost nothing, not even public, just announced last week they're not going to print a paper on Monday. Right. And the digital resources, you still have to pay. There's a paywall up. But in the interim, like, we've got a couple of nonprofit online startups that don't have a paywall. I think that's fantastic. I think even in Ohio, they have this amazing thing called States Newsroom. They're now in all 50 states, which are these, it's a lot of laid off reporters that have been rehired for this nonprofit network that is really doing a great job. So we need to support those. When I asked around Urbana, does anybody read the Ohio Capital Journal? Only one person had even heard of it. So probably the best response to my book, I gave a friend, Betty, whom I've known since I was 4, a copy of it. And she's a business leader and wealthy in Urbana. And she said, I guess I need to change my news diet. I was like,
that's a good note. I always like to end a conversation with something positive. And what we now know is that there are folks who've perhaps lost their jobs in newsrooms, but are collaborating in other ways to bring people real information. There are folks who are open to hearing new information that's outside of the normal diet. But the best news, Beth Macy, is that there are folks like you who are showing up, continuing to show up to tell the stories that a lot of folks wouldn't know, wouldn't care about. And you bring an empathy and a perspective to the participants in these stories that a lot of folks wouldn't otherwise have access to. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for being here. I do hope you'll come back.
I loved it. Thank you so much, Tanya. The last part of my book is arranged in 3 parts, and the last part is called Showing Up.
Paper Girl by Beth Macy. The last part, as she just said, is about showing up. And so regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, we really all do need to do a better job kind of showing up in conversation with one another. Beth Macy, the new book is Paper Girl. You are a journalistic superhero, and I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tanya.